Good morning, and well, I'll say Merry Christmas since tomorrow is Christmas for those of you who celebrate it in one form or the other. Trying to get a little festive with this video to get myself in the mood as well, and hope it spices us up a little bit. I just want to talk a little bit about Space Policy Directive 1, which came out earlier this month. There was a lot of anticipation about what it would do, and basically when it came out, there was a lot of analysis, obviously, about it. There was a lot of critique, a lot of criticism, and such. So I'm just going to briefly discuss what Space Policy Directive, or what I call SPD-1, which seems to be a new moniker for space policy executive orders that come out of this administration. What doesn't it do? It doesn't. First, it doesn't supplant the current national space policy, which is the one PPD4, which was basically put into effect back in 2010 under the Obama administration. So, in effect, what the Trump administration is doing with SPD-1 is they're amending just a portion. I believe it's Section 2 of the National Space Policy, and that basically dealt with changing NASA's direction around from going to, just this whole thing about, the quote journey to Mars, to actually refocus, changing the focus a little closer to our neighbor, the moon, with the eventual goal of getting to Mars. So obviously we're in a hyper partisan environment right now, and the president's detractors came right out and are basically lambasting it. If you read internet forums, which occasionally I do too much of, you see a lot of criticism about it. But one of the biggest criticisms I've heard, and I see this a lot in articles, and from journalists and such, is that, well, it doesn't have specifics. Well, SPD-1 is a policy. It's actually an amendment. It actually is an amendment to a national space policy. It isn't the specifics. We remember we go to the moon speech by John F. Kennedy back when he was president, that really jump-started the Apollo program. He didn't sit there and rattle off basically what he was going to do, specifically how to do it. He basically set the course, and in effect set the policy and basically brought together all the resources of the federal government to actually go to the moon. So basically SPD-1 does the same thing. It just modifies and changes the direction of the national space policy that we have right now, and it basically says to the executive agencies, this is your goal, go do it. It's the agencies like NASA and its subsidiaries and the groups it works with that are actually tasked with developing the plan. Another criticism is, well, this isn't going to happen until 2019, as basically the amendment to the policy says, to the national space policy says, this will be taken up in the 2019 appropriations for FY 2019. A lot of criticisms. Why aren't we just doing this right now? Well, this is the federal government, and things like this cost money. A lot of money has been allocated for specific things. Now you got to remember, the president has the power to make policy, but Congress has the power of the purse string. So Congress can basically tell these agencies what they're going to do. And we see this with the Space Launch System, which is a huge controversy in and of itself. It's basically a creature of Congress through their taxing and spending powers. So in that same way, even though the national space policy has been amended to shift back towards the moon, Congress still has to appropriate the funds, and we're already going into FY 2018, and there's really and the budgets are basically being set. Well, if you call a CR being set, that I suppose it is, but the money isn't there to do it. So this isn't going, any appropriations that are made to actually change this direction aren't going to be made until the FY 2019 appropriations. And of course, the SPD-1 basically says all these policy directives are subject to the appropriations being made. In other words, the onus is on Congress right now to actually provide the funds to do it, and whether or not Congress will will give the funds to actually permit NASA to change direction like this, which they will probably do it, because it will, for a multitude of reasons, not the least of which they'll give SLS something, a near-term goal to reach, a little bit better than the quote journey to Mars. one other thing I really liked about SPD1, at the bottom it has what I call the disclaimer. Now, you remember a video I did, and if you subscribe to the press, you remember my take on orbital ATK versus DARPA, where basically orbital ATK tried to use the national space policy to say that DARPA had to do this because it was the law. Now, there was really some litigation that went back and forth on that, and the federal courts basically came back and says no, the national space policy isn't law. But there was a little clip in there, and it was almost what we call dicta, or just comments by the court in that basically said that the national space policy doesn't create rights in third parties. In other words, the national space policy didn't create a right or standing for orbital ATK to sue. What SPD1, which I thought is really interesting to say the least, and I think they paid attention to what happened in orbital ATK versus DARPA, is they basically said that that SPD1 does not create any rights in third parties. In other words, it doesn't create a right for an orbital ATK or another company to come out and sue, or it doesn't give them standing to sue on the basis of the national, on the basis of this policy. So that kind of just eliminates that altogether, which I think was very foresightful and definitely learned from legislative history. So, just bottom line, SPD1 does not replace the national space policy of 2010. That's still in effect. It does amend it to change the focus away from Mars and to the moon, and just that one little thing. And as far as when a new national space policy is going to occur, I was at the Galloway Symposium on December 13th, and Dr. Pace was actually the keynote speaker at a luncheon. Among other controversial comments he made, he took some questions and answers, and people asked a specific question of when we should expect to see a new national space policy. And Dr. Pace's answer was essentially it's not a priority right now for the administration. There are other things on the administration's plate that they want to get done first. It isn't that they're not going to do a national space policy. It's just that it's not a priority. Now, those of you who are watching, those of you who follow me, those of us in the space policy community, we think that should be a priority. That's our perception. There are other priorities for the administration, and they will get around to, I'm sure, replacing PPD4 in their own due time. And when it comes out, they'll give more fodder for us to, for me to analyze, and other analysts to analyze, and of course for the critics and the forum lurkers to actually go out and complain about some more. So that's all I have for now. If you celebrate Christmas, Merry Christmas. If not, Happy Holidays or Happy Hanukkah, or whatever your beliefs are. I hope you enjoy the holiday season, and I hope it's a safe one for you. We're going to get snow here tomorrow in New Hampshire, so I'm going to be digging out. That's my Christmas present, I guess. But again, I hope you're safe, and if I don't talk to you before the end of the year, have a Happy New Year as well. Take care.